All right, so I'm so excited to welcome our speaker, Susan Poizner, to our virtual stage. If you don't already know, Susan is a fruit tree educator, an urban orchardist, an urban, if I cannot stumble over my words, I apologize, an urban orchardist from Toronto, Canada. She's the founder of the award-winning website orchardpeople.com and the author of Growing Urban Orchards, Grow Fruit Trees Fast, and Fruit Tree Grafting for Everyone. As the host of the Orchard People podcast, Susan shares insights on organic fruit tree care, food forests, and permaculture. Her goal is simple: to empower everyone to successfully grow fruit trees. As an ISA certified arborist, Susan also travels across North America as a keynote speaker, teaching gardeners, arborists, and home growers how to grow fruit trees that thrive. So excited to have you here today, Susan. Before I hand it over to you, I just want to do a couple of housekeeping notes. Everyone has permission to turn on their camera, to join in the chat discussion, and to unmute yourselves to speak throughout this presentation. We will be ending with a short Q&A, so if you have any specific questions that you want to hold on to until the end, then we can definitely explore that then. So thank you so much for being here again, and I will hand it over to you, Susan. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. It is lovely to be here. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Maybe put your thumbs up or say, yeah, something in the chat box. I would love to know that you're there. And let me just check the chat. So can you hear me okay? Getting nods, maybe. I guess so. Hello, is anybody out there?
Sounds great in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, sounds great. I got a sounds great in the chat. Okay, good. Sorry about that. It's very hard to speak to a computer screen. So I just wanted to put it out there. I'd love to know, before I start the presentation, how many people who are listening to this presentation actually have a fruit tree or are interested in getting a fruit tree. Do you mind terribly putting that in the chat box? I would love to know. And if you do have a fruit tree, have you had challenges with it? So let's put that in the chat box for now. We've got Mary does not have a fruit tree, but Mary, do you want one? Or if you had space, would you like one? Don says he has a few. Yes, some challenges. Uh-huh. Yes, and yes, challenges, says Sue. Oh, Marnie's getting one soon. And B. Beckett says, I have 2 apple trees and some northern cherries. Great. Felicia is interested in a fruit tree, but don't have one or a lot of space. This is so helpful, guys, because now I know who I'm talking to, and so we can be more precise during the talk. And there will also be time for you to ask your questions at the end. So let me share my screen. Hang on, let's do this. And Samantha says, uh-oh, I have a few Japanese beetles, desecrated them last year. Oh, I've heard that one before. Okay, let's share screen. If you guys are ready, we can get started. And desktop too. Okay, can you see my desktop, everybody? I'm going to pull up the chat so I can see you chitty-chatting with me. And tell me if you can see my desktop. Okay, hopefully you can. Great. Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to talk today about 10 secrets of fruit tree growing success. I'm Susan Poizner. I am from orchardpeople.com, which is a fruit tree care education website.
Baby boy.
Oh, maybe everybody can turn off their mics, mute everybody. So it's a fruit tree care education website. I have lots of articles. I have podcasts, I have videos, and I have courses. So I've learned a little bit about you guys, and now just a bit about how I started this whole thing. This was 14 years ago, amazingly, and I was for a time a gardener for the city of Toronto. I fell in love with gardening, wanted to learn more about gardening, but the thing that I really loved was trees. So I decided that we had this local park that you see me in this picture. Nothing really happened in the park. It was kind of run down. Nobody spent time there. And it wasn't really a fun place. And I had this in my imagination. I had this idea of what would happen if we planted fruit trees in the park. How would that change the park? So in the chat box, I'd love to hear, do you think it's a good idea to plant fruit trees in a public park? So put that in the chat box. I imagined lots of blossoms. I imagined lots of fruit, and I couldn't see that there was any downside. So let's keep going. I'm seeing that lots of you agree with me. You guys think it's a good idea. Let's see what happens. So there's the park. I took this picture one day because I actually saw somebody in the park using it. And as you can see, there really was not much there. Um, so let's see where we go from here. I spoke to my city councilor, Joe Mahevic, and I was very lucky that Joe was supportive. Joe grew up in a farming family. He loved fruit trees, and he's an eco person. So he basically said, look, Susan, we can try and do this. We need to have a meeting with the community to make sure everybody's on board. And if everybody's on board, let's go for it. So they went for it mostly. There are some people in my community who weren't up for this challenge, for this adventure. They had fears. And their fears were these fruit trees would cause problems, that they would be messy, that they would have diseases, that the children would pick up the fruit and throw it at each other. One of the people in one of the nearby houses was afraid that kids were going to throw apples at his roof. There were concerns. So instead of our original vision of having something like 28 trees, Joe arranged it so that we could have 14 trees, I think. It was 18, including some native fruiting trees. So we got the go ahead and we were really excited. And you can see us here in the old days. That's my husband, Cliff, and Sherry and Lynn, a couple of the volunteers. And so we had these new babies. We got them from the garden center. We planted them. It's like bringing home a baby from the hospital. It's like, oh, what do I do with this now? So we needed to mulch trees. I mean, you mulch trees, don't you? So we got some wood mulch and we mulched the trees. But what we didn't know was there were other responsibilities that we were going to have. We didn't realize how important fruit tree pruning is to keep a fruit tree healthy and productive. We didn't realize the importance of fertilizing the trees and how to fertilize the trees, and how if you fertilize them wrong, it can cause way more problems than not fertilizing them at all. We didn't realize that we were going to have to find ways to protect our trees from pests and diseases. We didn't know that young trees needed special care, and so on and so on. So here we are in the park. At this point, we had had some challenges. We had had some fruit trees that had lots of disease problems. And always in the back of my mind was those people who didn't want the orchard. They said, this is going to be a disaster. Those trees are going to be sick. They're going to be unhealthy. It's going to be bad fruit, and the kids are going to be throwing the fruit at each other. So I had to prove them wrong, and I had to do something. So I brought in experts to teach us how to take care of the trees. And this is one of our workshops. And our question was, we were all people with other jobs. This was not a full-time adventure. Our question was, what is the minimum that we need to do to keep our fruit trees healthy and productive? So the first thing I learned over this journey was the importance of choosing the right location. Over the years, I have visited a lot of community orchards, and the ones that thrive more are the ones that are in full sun. And the ones that are just an uphill struggle are the ones that are planted in the shade. So that's one thing. Fruit trees need full sun. But in the chat box, tell me what else you think is important when you're planting fruit trees. What are the other important things? And I'm looking at the chat box to see what you guys have to say. I'm also looking at some previous notes. Let's see who we've got here. Okay. B. Beckett says good soil drainage, and Felicia says that too. Stephen says soil and water. A lot of the projects that I have seen have ambitious plans of planting community orchards in a public space where there's no access to water. And those trees will be pretty doomed in a dry year. So yes, water. And did you know that fruit trees can only take in nutrition in liquid form? So if there's no water, they're starving as well as needing hydration. So Sue says to choose species for the location. Absolutely. And Sabrina says species tolerant of the local climate. Those are great points too. You can buy, for instance, an avocado tree or a lemon tree and plant it in your local park. And in our climate, it won't survive and it will die. So there's a whole bunch of things to consider. And Ramona says spacing, first person to say spacing, sunlight, and water. If you plant trees too close together, depending on what rootstock they're on and other things, the branches will fight each other and scratch up against each other. And then you get wounds that are openings for pests and disease problems. Underground, also, the root systems will fight to access the soil moisture, the nutrients. So spacing is also very important. Great answers, everybody. So let's see. Lots of you mentioned soil. This thankfully was not our park, but in one planting that I attended, it was in a beautiful private school in Toronto, full sun location, soil looked good. Like I checked out one of the planting beds and the soil looked good. But when it came to planting the trees, they said to me, "Oh, Susan, don't worry, we'll dig the holes for the trees. It'll be too hard for you." And I'm thinking, why is it going to be too hard for me and the students of the school to dig holes? Digging holes is not a problem. I didn't think twice. I got to the site and this is what I saw. So I don't know if you can see this, but you've got maybe 4 inches of good soil at the top. And then you've got maybe 4 inches or more of compressed gravel. And under that is rock hard subsoil. So the problem here was this beautiful site had once been a parking lot. And they never actually properly and legally removed the entire thing. They must have, removed the whatever it was at the top, but they left the compressed gravel. A fruit tree will struggle in this environment. It needs room for its roots to grow. So good soil is important. And I always say, before you even go to buy a tree, dig a hole in your backyard and check the soil. Just check and see what's going on there. Okay, soil quality is important. Now, one of you had said, Ramona said spacing. So think inside your head, what's wrong with this picture? Here we've got a cherry tree that's just been planted, fresh from the garden center, planted beside some really mature shrubs. What's going to happen to the nutrients in the soil and the water in the soil? If a little cherry tree root system, brand new, newly planted tree is competing with some older shrubs with extensive root systems, who's going to get the water and nutrition? So that's too much competition for a young tree. And that's already starting your tree off in a really difficult situation. Fruit trees are like kids, like humans. If they're neglected when they are young, if they don't get the nutrients they need, they will have health problems when they grow older. This is a very important time. So placement is important. Here's another reason the placement is important. Fruit trees don't like wet feet. They do not do well when it comes to being soggy all the time. So soggy roots can get root rot and fungal diseases. And so it's not wise to plant your fruit trees in a swampy area. That's another thing that can lead to failure when it comes to planting one fruit tree or a whole orchard. In this situation, our friend who had planted his fruit trees said, "Oh, it's okay. It's just wet in the spring or the summer or whatever." It was the spring. But it's a sign that there's not good drainage. It's not an ideal place for the fruit trees. I said, "Hey, do you have like a higher up area? Maybe you could move these young trees." Don't know what happened there. Okay, so drainage is important. Another thing to consider, and this is again, testament to really, it's great to dig a hole before you plant a fruit tree. Here in Toronto, I don't know if it's like this in London, there is so much renovation. And they take old houses, they rip out the soil, they use the front yard as a dumping ground. And then afterwards, they take away the garbage and they roll out they bring in 2 inches of soil and then roll out some grass on top. It looks like it's an okay location, but if you dig a hole, how good is that going to be for your fruit trees? In the chat box, tell me, how many inches of good quality soil do you think a fruit tree needs in order to thrive? I'd love to see that. I'll continue on, but I'm waiting for your answers. How many inches of good quality soil do you need for your fruit tree to thrive? Ooh, Mike says 12 to 14. What about you, the rest of you guys? 8, says Felicia. Samantha, 18. 12 at least, says Sue. 24. Sabrina, 8 to 10. I would think a foot or more. 12 inches, says Ramona. Minimum 12 inches. 12 inches of good soil, guys. Right? So it's worth it digging a hole, which Cliff and I are doing in this picture with our bare root trees. Okay, so the next challenge is order the right tree. What do I mean by order the right tree? Please put it in the chat box. Okay, order the right tree. Is there a wrong tree? Now, we did talk about how, a lemon tree, you want to make sure it's from your climate zone, that it can survive in your climate zone. And I think many of you guys are gardeners and you know about that. What other considerations would you keep in mind when you are ordering the right tree? Dawn says best species for location. Okay, well, what does that involve? Size at maturity, says Sue. That's a good one. Height and spread, says Susan. Right tree in the right location. Stephen is an arborist. That's an arborist saying. So I'm guessing you're an arborist. Yes. So all of these adapted to frost conditions, all of these are great points. Samantha, thank you for chiming in. Do you need more than one for pollination? Excellent. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. All right, all your answers are right. Yes, you need to consider pollination. Yes, you need to consider your climate zone. Yes, you need to consider frost conditions. However, if you go to the garden center, will you find trees with all that information on the label? Will you find the perfect tree? And so when I say here, order the right tree, I say order the right tree, which means go to the source, go to the fruit tree nurseries that specialize in this. So let's look at the difference. When you go to the garden center, you get a potted tree. Potted trees are in a pot. You can plant them anytime. You can plant them even in the midsummer. You don't need to order them in advance. There is not a huge selection of varieties or cultivars. So at the garden centers, what are you going to find? Macintosh apple, Honeycrisp apple, Bartlett pear, Bing cherry. These are the typical varieties that we're familiar with from the supermarket. Sadly, those are amongst the hardest varieties to grow. They have been chosen because the fruit is nice and firm, because it can be grown on an industrial scale, and because they're popular with the public, but not because they're easy to grow. So if a garden center brings in something like an apple tree called Liberty or Freedom Apple, who's going to buy it? They don't know that it tastes good, even though it might be easier to grow. So limitation for the garden center is potted trees and less varieties and cultivars. Potted trees also don't adapt as well to their new environment. So you put the pot in the ground and the roots are already, sometimes they're even root bound, but they're sort of used to the soil that they're in. So it takes a while for them to adapt. Okay, so now that's your potted tree. Limited selection and in a pot. Let's go to the specialist fruit tree nurseries, and on my website, orchardpeople.com, you can search under where to buy fruit trees or nurseries, and you can find a whole list of fruit tree nurseries. There's lots of them. And they have a huge selection. I wonder if I have a nursery list here. Probably I have them nearby. Huge selection of trees that you can choose from. Okay, huge, like varieties you've never heard of. So they have a wider selection of cultivars, but they will send you these trees bare root with no soil on their roots. So the tree has to be fully dormant, which means that you can only plant it in the early spring or in the late fall during the dormant season. It also means you need to order those trees in advance. and sometimes up to 6 months in advance if you want some of the easier to grow cultivars. Right. And so, okay, you got to think about your thing. It can't be like shoot from the hip, grab something from the garden center. But this is the beauty of bare root trees. And in the previous picture on the previous slide, you saw me and Cliff planting bare root trees. Is these young trees, they are young, they're 1 or 2 years old, but they adapt really well to their new location. The roots are ready for new soil, for a new life, for a new experience, and they're not all spoiled in the pot saying, I like my soil. I don't want anybody else's soil, right? So that's fantastic. Okay. So when you go to a fruit tree nursery, you get their catalog or you find their catalog online, and you can look for varieties that are easier to grow. And they're easier to grow because they're resistant to the problems that many fruit trees get. How many of us have seen this? In the chat box, I'd love to know if you know what this disease is on this apple tree. Curious if you know in the chat box. Apple scab, exactly. Exactly. That's apple scab. And there's lots of other really common diseases in our communities. And we need to know what is common. So, for instance, apple scab, powdery mildew, fire blight is a nasty one for apple trees. Canker, that's a problem as well. That's when you get oozing goop. It can be bacterial, it could be fungal. Black knot, plums get that a lot. Leaf spot, cherries get that. Brown rot, another cherry problem. Peach leaf curl, whoops. So all of these problems can be avoided, or many of them can be avoided if you choose the right tree. And guess what? Honeycrisp and Macintosh are not going to be the right apple trees to avoid them necessarily. Okay, so for example, here are some apple varieties. For whatever reason, I chose here some of them that are, these are for cider making. Arkansas Black is resistant to rust, mildew, and fire blight. Belle de Boscoup, that's also a cider apple. And it's in, both of these are heirloom apples, resistant to the above and to apple scab. Bramley seedling, immune to scab, resistant to the above. Those are cider apples, but there's also fantastic eating apples, fresh eating dessert apples like Freedom, Liberty. One of my favorite is called Pristine, and Sweet 16 is another fantastic one. All of these are apple cultivars you can get from a fruit tree nursery and not from a garden center. Okay. Other factors that you guys mentioned that we need to consider is cross-pollination, rootstock and final tree size. Okay, cross-pollination we talked about. Making sure you can plant an apple tree in your backyard, but if there's no other apples nearby, well, it won't cross-pollinate and you'll get blossoms, but you won't get fruit. Also, what kind of rootstock is your tree on? And that will determine the final size of the tree when it's full grown. So fruit trees are like puppies. They all start off small. But if you get one on a full-size rootstock, by the time you're finished with it, it could be three stories tall. So you got to get the right rootstock. You want to know when the harvest time is. Let's say you go to your cottage every August. You want to make sure that the harvest won't take place in August. Maybe you want a harvest that will take place before or after that. And you want to think about what you want to use the fruit for. Is it for canning or for cider or fresh eating? Okay, are you guys with me so far? How do you feel so far? Can we go on to point number 3? Give me a yes. I got to make sure you're not sleeping. Give me a yes in the chat. Yes. Okay, Susan says you guys are with me. Irrigate properly. What does that mean? Oh my goodness. When I first planted fruit trees, when somebody came up to me at one of my workshops and said, well, you're watering that tree wrong. And I'm thinking, huh, how can you water a tree wrong? Well, you can. Surprise, surprise to me at that time. So young trees do need a lot of water, right? So they need a lot of water, but of course you can't just spill it out on the ground and it all rolls away. They need it slow and gentle. We needed to water deeply, about 3 buckets a tree when those babies were young. And just you water a bit, you let it soak in, you water a bit more. And you need to water all around the tree, because if you always water one side of your tree, the roots on the other side don't get hydrated and they can die and they can suffer nutritional deficiencies. That's one of the problems with planting a fruit tree in the corner of your garden where half the roots are in your neighbor's garden. Are they okay with you coming out to mulch and water the tree on their side? Who knows? Hopefully you'll ask them. Here's the trick though. Sprinklers are a problem. Sprinklers sound great and they're easy, but the problem is they wet the entire tree, including the canopy. And first of all, the leaves don't take in much water. That's really not what they're designed for. But second of all, a wet canopy can attract fungal diseases. You do not want to maintain a wet canopy. And so you focus on the roots. You don't need to waste water, and focus on the roots. So you can use, you don't want to water the trunk or bark because especially if there is a gash or something on the trunk, waterborne diseases can come in. Whoops, but I didn't put here, you can use soaker hoses, you can use buckets, there's all sorts of little systems. Just avoid sprinkler systems. Okay, so these are cuties from my neighborhood. Stash the cat, and who's that dog? Lily, not Lily. Oh, I forgot her name. She's adorable. Anyways, the reason I have these pictures are in this group, how many of you have pets and how many of you feed your pets? Please put it in the chat box. Some of you may have pets and not feed them. I don't know. So who has a pet? Samantha has a pet. Do you feed your pet, Samantha? Yes, Mike does feed his pets. Thank you. I'm so glad. Right. No pets. Okay. Some people, Ramona doesn't have pets. Yes, and yes, says Samantha. I'm so glad you guys feed your pets because the problem here is many people plant fruit trees and somehow expect that the fruit trees are going to feed themselves. The problem is like with Stash, the cat can get up, go walk around. If his mummy forgets to feed him, if Sherry forgets to feed him, he'll go out, he'll find a rat to eat or something like that. But fruit trees can't pick up and walk away if their soil doesn't have enough nutrition. So we need to feed them. And we need to feed them correctly. And it does not involve lotions and potions and all sorts of stuff from the garden center. Really, what we need to do is in the early spring, before fruit trees start their marathon of activity, they have to open buds, they have to open blossoms, form baby fruit, form leaves, create shoots, all that work. Before that is a great time to spread 2 inches of compost or 1 inch of well-rotted manure around the tree roots in the early spring. Okay, so 2 inches all around the roots, ideally up until the edge of the canopy, because that is where the feeder roots are, at the edge of the canopy. Okay, optionally, you can cover with 2 inches of wood chips. Arborist wood chips are amazing if you can get your hands on them. Please do not add commercial fertilizers unless you know that the tree needs it, because these fertilizers can very easily damage the soil and freak out the tree. I will only use fertilizers like that if I've done a soil test and I know something is lacking from my soil, because once you add stuff, it is not good. Either it goes, it pollutes our environment, or it can never go away. You can't wash away some of these nutrients, etc. Okay, number 5, how are we doing for time? We're doing pretty good. Prune your fruit trees annually. So this is the one that I really didn't understand. Why is it important? There was so much confusion when we first planted these trees. And I knew that with native trees, you prune off the dead wood. If there's a damaged branch, you prune it off. So why was all this talk about fruit tree pruning? And over time and over inviting people for workshops, I learned that it is so key. It's so important because it improves the tree's health. When we prune fruit trees, we're actually pruning out perfectly healthy branches. When I teach arborists, they lunge at me when I do demonstrations. Don't cut that off, it's healthy. But the point is, we need to remove those branches in order to have fabulous air circulation in our canopy so that pests and diseases will not make a home there. Pests and diseases love dark, damp canopies. That's not what we want. So we want to improve tree health by getting good air circulation into the tree. It also improves fruit quality. If I don't prune my tree, I can have 100 branches with lots and lots of fruit, but each little fruitlet is going to be hard and not taste very good because the tree only has a limited amount of energy and it's going to be spreading it out to everything, right? If I remove strategically, let's say 25% of those branches, then the remaining branches have more energy to grow longer, to grow stronger, and to support a better harvest. So pruning is important. Pruning also improves tree stability and it creates a solid fruit-bearing structure for your tree. So when we had the ice storm in 2013 and all the trees in this neighborhood, so many big, huge trees had been blown down, little trees, our trees in our park that had been pruned properly for 3-4 years, young trees, not one bit of breakage. Because we design our trees so that these scaffold branches are so strong, they can support a heavy harvest. So ice is not a problem for them. Okay, so Stephen writes here about pruning, stress them to survival mode. Pruning becomes an art to imagine the future. That is a beautiful thing to say. Pruning becomes an art to imagine the future. I love that, guys. Because part of what we do when we prune is we are thinking what we want the tree to be, what we are creating. So when I teach my pruning workshops, I do online pruning workshops at orchardpeople.com. We spend 2 deep hours into talking about how do you predict the future so that you can create that structure. Now, if you prune at the right time of year, you also can reduce tree size. A lot of people say, Susan, when I prune my apple tree, it always gets bigger and bigger and I get more water shoots and it's a disaster. And that all has to do with the time of year. Winter pruning spurs growth. Summer pruning slows growth down. I have an article on my website, orchardpeople.com, when to prune fruit trees, that will teach you all about it. And by the way, at the end, I'm going to share a link so you guys can go on my mailing list and you get a free ebook with lots of information, but you also get a series of emails which will give you all these links that I am referring to. Okay. So how's the air circulation in this apple tree, guys? Put it in the chat box. What do you think? When this is going to leaf out, is this a place that pests and diseases want to hang out? Okay, I think you guys got the picture. Yes, who says crap? So yeah, that's not great. What about this? What do you think about the air circulation here? In the chat box. Looks good. I can breathe just looking at that picture, right? Creating this structure takes a few years. It's great if you can start from your first pruning cut, if you buy a bare root tree, is on the day you plant that tree. So that is the ideal way. But even an older neglected tree can slowly be formed into a structure where the scaffold branches get really strong, where there's great air circulation. So I think you guys can see what I'm going for. So, and this is the thing. Ideally, you want to start pruning when your fruit trees are young. So this woman bought my book, Growing Urban Orchards, and I wrote in the book about pruning. I don't think she's lovely, but I don't think she read the book because she says, is it time for me to prune my fruit trees yet? So guys, in the chat box, is it time to prune this fruit tree yet? Or perhaps past the time? What's the problem with this tree? Yes, it is time, says Sabrina. Do it now. Yes. No, wait until spring, says Stephen. Oh, interesting. Okay, that's a very good question. Would you wait until spring? Well, first of all, with regards to pruning this tree, if she had pruned that tree from the very day she planted a bare root tree, it would never look like this because our goal is to create strong fruit-bearing branches. Those branches are close to breaking. We would be doing quite a harsh pruning, few pruning cuts in the early years, like pruning off a lot of the tree into short stubs even. Those little branches would become short stubs, but then they grow into strong branches. So that is one of the problems. The other problem is, ideally, please, in the first 2 years when you plant your fruit tree, remove all the baby fruit. At that point in time, your fruit tree needs to put its energy into its root system. It doesn't need to waste energy producing fruit for me and for you. That's just not nice. So that's another mistake she made. Really, you cannot allow a young tree to fruit like that. It's risking the tree's health, taking energy away from the fruit system, from the root system, not the fruit system. Okay, I'm going to plow through. So what's the problem here in the chat box? I'm sure you know, perhaps. Anybody? I'll tell you then. Pear trellis rust. There's also cedar apple rust. So point number 6 in my tips, and by the way, in the ebook that you're going to get at the end of this course, we'll review these points. So don't worry if you didn't take notes. But point number 6 is we always need to monitor our fruit trees, because all of these symptoms, if we see them early on, we can nip them in the bud. So you're always looking for signs of pests and diseases. And here's the great news. There are a limited number of pests and diseases that fruit trees get. And that's it. So all you need to do is learn those diseases. In my online course, Certificate in Fruit Tree Care, for instance, I teach the 7 different diseases that are so common with fruit trees. Once you know those 7 diseases, you're like, okay, I know how to deal with this. It's okay. And the problem does not have to get out of hand. So scouting, it's called in integrated pest management. You need to scout your trees. So this is canker. Canker can be oozing goop, or it can be hard, crusty areas you want to look out for. Black knot, that's on plum trees a lot. And there's fire blight, those curved hook branches. This is a nasty bacterial disease that you do not want to get. And if you do you wanted to get rid of early on. This is a blurry picture of apple scab, which can be avoided. And let's see where I was going with this. I'm going to quickly tell you that I visited an orchard in Seattle. These trees were over 100 years old, had been lost in sort of a wilderness part of the park. People didn't realize there was once an orchard there. They hacked away at all the weed trees and bramble, and they exposed these beautiful apple trees that were still blooming and still producing fruit after over 100 years. Pretty cool. But they couldn't use chemicals there, and they had to control pests. And so one of their ways of doing that was simply good hygiene. Always clean up and remove all the fallen fruit and diseased leaves around your trees. That alone will get rid of so many of your problems. Now, don't put it in the compost. You have to literally bag it up and get it off the site. If the apples are healthy, sure, put it in the compost. If they're rotting and they've got disease and pest symptoms, do not, because it stays on the site. It'll come back full force next year. And I know I'm putting a lot in this little presentation, guys, and I want to leave time for you to ask questions. There are organic sprays you can use. One that I always do is a dormant spray every year. So we use a mix of lime sulfur and dormant oil. It's too late right now to do it. The best part of it is it smothers overwintering insects in your fruit trees, and you spray it in all the little nooks and crannies and the cracks of the trees where little eggs might be. And that alone is if you do one spray, that's the one, but it has to be in a very small window and a certain time of year. So always read the instructions before you do it. Then there's other options. And if you sign up with me, you're going to get some links to some articles about using holistic and homemade sprays. And I know it sounds airy-fairy, but guys, it works. These holistic sprays, they could be made with molasses. They could be made with yogurt, amazingly, but they can really help fruit trees. So yeah, you'll learn more about that. Okay, now Stephen has an excellent question. How would you recommend to dispose of diseased limbs? I understand that black knot can be buried. Sending it to the compost would not be good. Sending it to the landfill releases methane, which is a nasty greenhouse gas. Stephen, what a great question. Here's what I do. with diseased leaves and branches, I will send it off to city compost. I don't have a problem with that. I was a gardener for the city of Toronto and I saw how big those compost piles are, and they actually create a lot of heat, enough heat to destroy the pathogen. So I'm not worried about that. If you want to bury them, you can look it up. I'm pretty sure you can bury 6 feet under the ground. And a lot of people who live in rural areas will burn them, but I'm pretty sure in the city that is not permissible. So those are some options for you. And Sabrina says some areas have yard waste pickup, and that is absolutely okay. Don't worry, you're not spreading the disease then. Finally, there's something called orchard socks. Whiffle Tree Nursery carries them. And do I have a better picture? Yeah, when the fruit on, this is for apples, can be used on pears. One of the problems is little insects lay eggs. When the fruitlets are quite small, they lay their eggs under the skin of the fruit. And the eggs then hatch, the little baby maggots grow, eat the fruit or the seeds or whatever they're going for, and then your apple is ruined. You can often see a little bit of frass, which is insect poop, oozing out of your apple if it's been infected. So here's what you do. You get orchard socks. You can get them from Whiffle Tree Nursery here in Ontario. And they're little sockettes, like you get like little try-on socks from the shoe stores. And you just slide the socks onto the little baby fruit, tie it up in a knot, okay? And then the fruit will grow and the sock will expand and the insects can't lay their eggs under that thing. So we've done that for many years and had perfect fruit. There was an insect that came at 1 year that we haven't had since, thank goodness, that somehow got through, but that's a long story. That was a sawfly that got in at blossom time. So that was too bad, but we haven't had that problem since. And there you go, perfect apples. And it's funny because, yeah, these ones look okay too that didn't have it, but often you will see the other ones, if you do an experiment, the other ones get attacked. Okay, so questions. Would you like to ask some questions before I end off the conversation? I'm going to stop share for a moment. And feel free to turn on your mics or you put on your cameras or even ask in the chat box. Are you sleeping? Oh, there you are. Okay, Japanese beetles, any thoughts? That's Samantha, very difficult. There are Japanese beetle traps. If you get one, don't put it on your tree. Put it on your neighbor's tree. Put it somewhere else because people have told me, thank God we don't have this problem, that it just attracts more and more Japanese beetles. It kills lots of them, but it just keeps attracting more and more. Now, my thought is related to Dawn's question about nettle tea. Here, I've done a podcast, guys, and in my podcast, it's called Orchard People. And you can look up the podcast of why insect pests do not attack healthy trees. And I did a whole interview with an entomologist who has lots of evidence to say that healthy trees are not interesting for pests. It's hard for them to digest the sugars in their leaves. So the best thing you can do, yes, Stephen says soapy water and, sweep your pests in the Japanese beetle in the soapy water, they'll die. I do that with my bean plants. But if you really have a lot of them and it's too much work, yes, you can do a trap crop. That's kind of like putting your trap in somebody else's yard, which I don't think they'll want either. But improving the health of your tree with holistic sprays. And that is linked to Dawn's question. On orchardpeople.com, in the search box, put, what should you put? Homemade. There's an article about homemade fruit tree sprays. And these sprays will improve your tree's ability to photosynthesize, and they'll get stronger and stronger. And they're made out of really simple stuff. So molasses and things like that. Nettle tea itself, you can do fermented nettle. That would nourish your tree. I don't have an article about that yet, but will at some point. But yes, improved tree health is key. Sue says, is it reasonable to plan A, espalier trees to reduce space requirements, or B, dwarf rootstock only or full size? Great questions. I love your question, Sue. Yes, espalier is possible. Yes, espalier is beautiful. May not be super duper productive, but it'll be productive enough for your home. And yes, those trees need to be on dwarfing rootstocks. Otherwise, you are not going to have a good experience. So those have to be on dwarfing rootstock. Yes, you can plant a small fruit tree on dwarfing rootstock and not do it as a beautiful two-dimensional espalier planting. Absolutely. Just make sure, and there's something else called high density plantings where cider apples are often grown like this, where they grow fruit trees on dwarfing rootstocks, maybe anywhere from 3 to 5 feet apart. So you can have quite a few different varieties. They're not two-dimensional like espalier. And actually, there's minimal pruning. Instead, you get these, they're called feathers. So these young trees, but they have branches, and you just keep tying the branches down below horizontal to produce fruit, and it slows down the growth so they don't want to get longer or go up high. So it's called tall spindle planting. So there are lots of options for small gardens. As long as your garden is full sun, well-drained soil, go for it. I think you should do it, definitely. Dawn says, any suggestion for leaf curl on a nectarine tree? I sprayed last year with dormant oil, but wasn't terribly effective. This year, I did not spray. Any suggestions? Great question. With your nectarine tree, the problem is not insects. The peach leaf curl is fungal disease. Fungal, I think. Yeah, not bacterial, it's fungal. So your dormant spray is a great thing to do for pests, but it doesn't help the peach leaf curl. So recently, last night, we had the Orchard People meetup. We have a monthly meetup for my students. And somebody was saying that I really trust, who's very knowledgeable. She used a yogurt spray, like diluting yogurt with water. And again, on that homemade fruit tree sprays article on my website, you will learn about this. On a tree with peach leaf curl, essentially the friendly microbes outcompete with the bad guys on those leaves. And so the bad guys just can't thrive, and it really can clean up the problem. So amazingly, you don't have to go to the garden center and buy anything. You just got to make some yogurt or buy some yogurt. Pretty easy, huh? Okay, any other questions before we wrap up? Questions, comments? Well, let's go back to the screen. Let's see if I can share screen again. Screen 2, share. Great. Okay. So secret number 10, what is it? Let's see. I'm going to keep my chat box open here. I'd like to see what you guys are up to. Always keep learning. So I started this journey all these years ago in 2009 when we planted our first trees. I floundered for years, 3 years, trying to figure things out. Things were not going my way until finally I figured out what the minimum things that what I had to do. What is the minimum that I need to do to keep these trees healthy and productive? I have shown you some highlights here. In my book, Growing Urban Orchards, I talk about that whole thing. That's what it's about. What is the minimum you need to do in order to grow fruit trees successfully? But this slide is always keep learning, because guess what? I'm still learning every day. I do a podcast every month. I invite experts on my show and I learn from them. There's all these different cultivars. There's all these different possibilities. I wish I had more space to grow trees. Our park is, I've been told by the park supervisors who love the project, but they say no more trees for you. You can't keep planting trees in the park because there's just no more room. We need room for ball playing. So yeah, I'm always looking for new trees to have fun with. But I am also always learning, and you guys will be too once you start that journey. It's like any type of gardening. Okay, if you guys want some links and more information, I've got this little ebook. You can get a copy. at orchardpeople.com/sign up. That's where you can get a copy. Now, let me see, there's a few more comments. Peach leaf curl. Stephen asks, what about mycorrhizae to help with feeding? That's a great question because, Stephen, you've identified soil health is, of course, very linked to the health of your fruit tree. So those soil organisms, we don't feed our fruit trees. The soil organisms do. They eat the organic matter, they poop it out or they die, and they make that organic matter into a form that fruit trees can take in. Mycorrhizae is really good when you're planting a new tree. So you can sprinkle some mycorrhizae in the planting hole, and it's a nice place to start. But ultimately, you just want, with your practices of mulching, also your holistic sprays or the homemade fruit tree sprays, you're going to be attracting new microbes, healthy microbes to the soil, and they will help feed your trees and help keep those trees healthy. Another little secret is you can go to a local forest right near you at this time of year, lift up the leaves and look under the leaves. And if, I don't know if this is naughty or not, but you can take a handful of the soil because forest soil has a lot of healthy microbes in it. Just look up, make sure the trees aren't diseased there. And you can put a handful of that into your planting hole or sprinkle it around your trees. Yeah, you can try it. Just make sure it's a healthy area. Okay. Susan says how to pick. I don't know how to pick. Oh, how to pick fruit. Oh, that's I don't have lots to say about that. I don't think it's for us, it's not that complicated. We pick on extension sticks. They let us get high up. It is a bit of a trick to figure out each cultivar when's the ideal time to harvest, but that's different for different cultivars. Dawn says, does high clay content in the soil suggest fruit trees will struggle? No, clay has a lot of nutrition. Now, if it's compressed and rock solid, that's going to be a bit of a problem. But clay itself, it can be very nutritious. And every time you mulch with compost, put organic matter on, you're going to be helping to soften the soil. And thank you, Stephen, about harvesting. The fruit should release easily when ready. Wow, Sue, would yogurt work for fire blight? I don't have any evidence of that. That's really, fire blight needs to be pruned out as soon as you see it. You need to sterilize your pruners before and after. You need to bag that stuff up in plastic and send it to the municipal waste or something. Get that out of there. Fire blight is rotten, horrible. And Ramona says, thanks so much. This was great. Well, Ramona, your timing is perfect. Thanks, everybody. You guys are really fun, even though I haven't seen anybody's faces, which is so weird. I will never get used to that part of talking on Zoom. But I am so glad you guys had fun. I hope you're inspired. And thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here today, Susan. It was really, really great to see your presentation, and I love how interactive this was. It definitely makes this virtual space a lot more enjoyable, that's for sure.
It is
I
fun. Well,
think, yeah,
thank you so much for inviting me and thinking of me.
well, yeah, hopefully we can continue to continue to work together, see what you're doing in Toronto. I have your book here on hand that I'm excited to share with
Yay!
our with obviously, with us giving fruit trees away, we really want to make sure that this information is conveyed to them as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And if your team here gets the book Grow Fruit Trees Fast, I don't know if you're giving it out to them, that would be great. But otherwise, they can find it on Amazon. It's a quick read, just an hour's read. And if you like it, I would be so grateful if you go on Amazon and put a little review saying, hey, I like Susan's book. I learned a lot. That would be super. Okay,
Definitely. Well, we
thanks,
thank you so
everybody.
much.
Take care. Bye
Yeah.
for now.
All right.
Okay,
Have a good rest of
bye-bye.
your afternoon. Bye.